and welcome to the Live One on BNet, the daily program where we help managers manage their business, career, and even their personal life. I wasn't sure if the mic was all the way up. That's why I started over again. So whether you're a manager or even just aspiring to be one, join us every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. I am your host for today, Sumi Das, and each Monday on the Live One, we're going to be bringing you a special guest. Today, our special guest, who's joining us in the studio, what a treat, we have author and body language expert Carol Kinsey Goman. I got it right.
You did.
I keep wanting to say Carol Kinsey Goman, and so I'm going to apologize now because I have a feeling I might do it in the show. Maybe I'll just call you Carol. Can I do that?
That's good.
Her latest book, The Silent Language of Leaders, which we have here, explains how body language, maybe I'll hold it up on this side. There we go. We can see it there. Explains how body language can help or hurt how you lead. Thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
This is great. I'm so glad to be here.
Great. Now, we also have with us Lindsay Blakely, editor of the Business Owners section on BNet. Hello, Lindsay.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us on another Monday.
Always a pleasure.
A quick reminder before we get started, this conversation isn't just limited to Carol, Lindsay, and myself. You can be a part of it as well. Use your chat window. That's how you can join us. Send us a question, send us a comment. Lindsay is going to be keeping an eye on that chat window. Thanks again for that. And she's going to let us know what you all are saying in that chat window, and we'll try to include as many of the questions and comments as we can so you can be a part of that conversation as well. So the Live One is a show that helps managers manage, as I mentioned in the introduction there. So if you are a manager, what are the hallmarks of an effective manager when it comes to body language, Carol?
Well, I think the main one is that there's a wonderful alignment between your goals, your words, and how your body looks.
Okay.
So that, for instance, if you wanted collaboration, it would depend on where you sat in the room, it would depend on how you gestured, it would depend on what you said. All of that, if that's congruent with your goal, you're going to be effective.
Okay. Are there a lot of managers who don't do that?
Unfortunately, there are. And it's not so much that they can't, it's they don't realize how powerful it is.
Mm-hmm.
They may have all the right words and all the wrong moves.
All the right words, but all the wrong moves. I like that. Okay, so today we're talking about body language with Carol Kinsey Goman. Now I want to ask you, who are the executives that are well-known, public figures, that have mastered the art of body language?
Well, I think Steve Jobs is at the top of most people's lists, mine included.
Mm-hmm.
He has a wonderful way of presenting, usually, where he walks a stage. He doesn't stand or hide behind a podium or a lectern.
That's right. He never uses one.
Uses gestures, he engages, has good eye contact, he engages with the audience. Of course, they love him to begin with, which doesn't hurt, by the way, but he really pulls on that, and he's a really good presenter.
Okay, so the last time that Steve Jobs was in the public eye was when he introduced the iPad 2. This was in March. I think it was the first week in March, and it was not too long after he announced that he was going to take a leave of absence for health reasons for Apple. Now, everybody was a little bit surprised about that. And of course, all eyes were on him, maybe more so than usual, when he announced the iPad 2. We actually have a clip. You watched that presentation very closely, and you noticed that he made a particular gesture. So, Matt, if we have that clip, can we go ahead and play it?
Introduce today.
Yeah, there's the gesture. Very unlike Steve Jobs. Hands behind the back.
Okay.
In the 9-minute clip I watched, he put his hands behind his back 17 times.
So we actually cut together several instances. It's not as if he did this all in rapid succession, but several instances of him doing this. So 17 times. I mean, why is that unusual?
It's unusual because it's not his baseline. For other people, if that's how you presented, with your hands behind your back a lot of the time, that wouldn't be such an eye-opener when you watched it. But when somebody usually uses a lot of open gestures and then begins to hide their hands, it's a signal that something's happening, a new tentativeness, something's going on. The other thing is that, knowing or not, hands behind the back is a pretty negative signal for a presenter.
So why is that, though? Because sometimes people just don't know what to do with their hands, you know? You can't really, putting them in your pockets seems as, if you're being aloof, right?
Right. My impression of that gesture was that he was sort of self-satisfied. It was like, here's the technology and it's going to speak for itself.
That might be. That might be how he felt. But most people in an audience, when they see hands behind the back, revert to an ancient wiring that was before we could speak, before we could read, before we could write. I had to see you coming toward me and figure out if you were a friend or a foe. And if I couldn't see your hands, it was a very suspicious sign.
You might have a club behind your back.
You might have a club, a rock, or anything to do me harm. So today, even though there's no logic to it, hidden hands sends a pretty negative message to most people in an audience.
Okay.
So, but a lot of people might say that this is an imprecise science, that perhaps, there might be some critics out there who, and I'm sure you've heard this and fielded these criticisms, psychological mumbo jumbo. Aren't you attributing something that isn't really there? You're reading into things. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, they're right.
Okay.
There's something called a halo effect. If I like you, I'm going to attribute all sorts of wonderful qualities to you that you may not possess. So I may take a certain body language movement that I would judge detrimental in somebody else and really see the good in you. So and if I don't like you, the same thing, I'll suspect every motive that you have and every movement that you make. But there is also some really good science behind body language, and that's what makes it so much fun today. It's beyond the observational, beyond the anecdotal, and it's right into the research labs.
So tell us a little bit about the research.
Well, one of my favorite is EEGs, that scientists, if they have an EEG on your head, will look at something called the peaks and valleys of your brain activity. And they'll notice that one valley called N400 is something that you dip into if I'm talking gobbledygook nonsense. Your brain simply doesn't make sense. They also notice that very same valley if I say something and my body says something else. So if I say welcome and I cross my arms, your brain goes right down in that dip. So in a very real way, when your body and your words are out of alignment, you don't make sense.
Interesting. Okay. We are speaking with Carol Kinsey Goman. She is the author of The Silent Language of Leaders, and we're talking about body language and how it can help or hurt the way you lead. So who are some other executives? Can you give us some other examples of people who have good skills when it comes to body language?
I think John Chambers has excellent body language, and it's
Cisco?
Not for the same reason that Steve Jobs has. I think Chambers' magic is in his cadence and in his voice and in his being able to really project this same figure of calm and certainty, and I know that his employees really respond to that.
Okay. We want to let you know that you can join us. You can join this conversation that we're having here in the studio. Use your chat window, send us a question, send us a comment, and we'll be sure to get to it.
So we've got a couple of comments
okay.
if we want to bring some of these
Yeah,
up.
sure, Lindsay.
So, okay, we've got one that says, isn't it most important to be sincere and not think about hand gestures?
Yes, it is. Body language will give you away. So if you are truly sincere about your message, as long as you can get some of your bad habits out of the way, you're going to be fine. But let's say, for instance, that crossing your arms was the way that you stood because you're more comfortable that way, or the room is chilly, or whatever. But the message that you're going to deliver, even sincerely, is one of openness and collectiveness and candor. You probably would want to get that bad habit, because we know that most people judge this as a negative habit, out of your nonverbal vocabulary.
Okay.
That's hard to do, I think.
It is hard to do. It's why I'm a coach.
What about overusing gestures? So someone's asking, the thumb gesture that kind of started with Clinton. And then,
Yeah,
exactly.
You know
And
why?
Obama
he didn't
does
want
it too.
He didn't want to do the finger, which
Yes.
nobody likes, the shaking fingers.
Right.
And then it got to be the pointed thing, and then the thumb. I mean, it's
So now you see everyone doing the pointed thumb. Is that being overused? What does that mean?
Yeah, I think we have a deeply wired inclination to want to point out things to people, and we're trying to find some way that makes it more palatable to do so. But you certainly can over gesture, and if you watch the most highest status, the biggest names that you can think of in either in government or in your company, they're not gesturing like this. Their gestures are right around their waist. That's a very powerful plane to gesture in, and they're minimal. The minute you start to gesture a lot, there's more passion, and maybe that's what you want. But when your gestures get above your shoulders, you just look erratic.
Okay. So let's go on to now some executives that need some work on their body language skills.
Well, my favorite needs some work is Steve Ballmer.
Okay, we actually have a clip because we knew you were going to say that, and we wanted to show that. It's from YouTube. So let's
Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Ballmer!
You have to keep watching this clip for a while because it goes on, but it's just an
It keeps
example.
getting better.
Yeah. It's just amazing how he manages to keep up that intensity.
Come on! Give it up for me!
That would be credit.
Okay, we're going to start off with a positive. That's nice of you, Carol.
This was a Microsoft audience. I don't believe he knew this was going to end up to be a top 10 pick on YouTube.
Right.
But that's how we have to think as executives or managers.
Exactly. I mean, you say that executives, actually everybody, should keep in mind that this is the era of YouTube. This is the era of Flickr. This is the era of flip cams, even though they're no longer made, and camera phones where you can videotape something, upload it, and it can go viral within an hour.
That's right.
So what should people do? Just always be restrained?
Well, that wouldn't hurt in some cases, but no, I'm
Exercise a little
teasing.
restraint, yeah.
You know, I just realized, it's just like they used to say, don't say anything you wouldn't want to see in the paper the next day.
Right.
Don't do things you don't want posted on YouTube the next day. I mean, that's really the bottom line, depending on where you want your career to go. It could be a very short career with the wrong YouTube uptake.
You know, I have to say, though, what I liked about that clip is he's totally unscripted.
Yeah.
Yes.
He is, unabashedly passionate.
And that's what I said, for that Microsoft audience, that was probably just a fun moment. But when you put that,
To see an executive let their hair down?
yeah, but when you
What
see
little hair
that
he has
over,
Right. Yeah.
over and over,
So-
it just becomes too much.
Right. So we are giving him credit, and we're excusing the behavior. But what was wrong with what he did, though?
It was
but besides the fact that it went viral, Carol.
It was just over the top.
Okay.
I mean, you can if it lasted a little bit shorter, it probably would have been just as impactful and not look quite so nutty.
Yeah, because it was almost a minute and a half of him leaping around with his hands up in the air, going like this. It was just it was over the top.
But there's
But what does that do to the people who are in the audience? For me, the first few seconds are like, oh, that's fun, and then I get turned off because I feel like, okay, is this about him or is this about what he's about to say and about the company? Or I know he's saying, I love this company, I think is what he says when he finally calms down and gets to the podium, but.
I think most people would have your reaction. But again, if you're Microsoft employees, that's a little different audience. And that's another thing about body language. It really does change with the context. So to give him credit again, that was his audience, and they may have loved it. But certainly had I been in that audience, I would have been cringing after about 30 seconds.
Okay.
Right with you.
Okay. We are speaking with Carol Kinsey Goman. She's the author of The Silent Language of Leaders. She's a body language expert. Now, I want you to tell us, what are the body language skills that good leaders should embody? You said that there are two really sets of skills.
Yeah, when followers look at a leader for the first time, they're gauging two sets of body language cues. One is your status, authority, credibility, confidence, one set of cues. The other is your warmth, likability, empathy cues. And the trick is to be able to have both, but employ one or the other depending on the situation, or at least deploy more of one or the other depending on the situation.
Okay. Now we want to do something fun. First of all, we want to remind you that you can join our conversation here. Use your chat window. Lindsay Blakely, our BNet editor for the business owner section of the site, is here, and she's monitoring the chat window for your questions and comments. So put her to work. So we want to show a few images, and Carol, we want to get your impression of them. The first one is kind of famous now, given the news that has been going on for the last week. It's called the Situation Room photo. Here it is. So you see here President Obama, Vice President Biden, And of course, the person in the room that most people have been focused on is Hillary Clinton and her expression. Can you, Carol, kind of go around the room here and what do you read into this photo?
Well, first of all, I think it's a fabulous photo. I'm so glad it got out there because it shows a president who is really a collaborator. I mean, not just in what he says, but in where he sits, in the kind of body language that he portrays during that kind of tense moment. And I think that the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, hand to the mouth gesture is very interesting because even though I've heard her say that she might have been just covering her mouth because she had a cough or an allergy. What I have is seen this gesture over and over in movie theaters across the U.S., and that is when females are watching a scene that is maybe a horror film or a very intense drama. They tend to either close their eyes, maybe even cover them with their hands, or bring their hand to their mouth and cover their mouths. Now, I don't think
men don't do that.
Men don't do that. And I think it's because that maybe, again, that ancient wiring to a threat. And I believe that men more likely would react to a threat by trying to get as big as they could and look as threatening back, while women who couldn't do that would try to stay as still and as quiet. And one way you stay quiet is to put your hand over your mouth.
Okay, so if you're a manager, should you kind of mirror what President Obama is doing in this photo?
If you want to be a collaborative manager.
Okay.
If you want,
that's the empathy that you were talking about.
That's the empathy and even where you sit. So if you want to chair the meeting and make everybody know you're chairing it, you sit in the center of the room. You hold your posture erect. You hold your head high. You know, you do all those things that project status and authority. If you want to be a collaborator, you sit in another chair.
And sometimes a good manager would have both, as you said. And
yes.
There are certain occasions where you have to use one set of gestures and certain occasions where you use the other.
And a certain time when leadership rotates.
Okay. So the next picture that we have is of the Google trios, as I call it, although they're no longer a trio since Eric Schmidt is not the CEO anymore. If we have that image, we'll pull it up. It's of Eric Schmidt, Sergey Brin, and Larry Page. Here we go, just trying to enlarge it. And there you see, that's Eric Schmidt in the background standing. That's Sergey Brin in the middle, sitting on his bar stool, and then, or counter stool, whatever. And then you have Larry Page next to him. So what are your thoughts on this image, Carol?
I like this image also because it's a great example of someone, Sergey Brin in this case, in the middle, who absolutely is not engaged with the person to his left.
Behind him, Eric Schmidt.
Eric Schmidt, or to the other person, because what he has is
he looks like he's looking towards him, though.
He does.
No?
He has his head toward him, but his entire body, is oriented the other way. It's like giving somebody the cold shoulder. I've seen this in boardrooms around the country. I can be looking at you, but the minute I start to orient my shoulder away from you, and my torso, my feet, every part of his body except his head wants to be out of there.
I see. Interesting. Okay. All right. So the next photo we have is of a very famous golfer. Anyone know who it is?
I do.
Tiger Woods. And this is an image from the press conference that he called after the famous incident involving his wife, and then the news came out about his extramarital affairs. And so this is an image taken from when he sort of fessed up and apologized. A lot of people call it the apology presser. So here he is with his hand on his heart, and he's kind of mid-sentence. What do you make of this image, Carol?
Well, when you put your hand on your heart, you pledging allegiance, or you're absolutely trying to show that you're being honest. And I say trying to show because if that gesture had come in the middle of a spontaneous set of remarks, it would have had a little different meaning to me. He was reading from a script at the time, so you wonder if he also hadn't scripted that gesture.
Ah. You say it was all manufactured.
It may have been. And then again, that's the thing about body language.
Because he didn't take any questions. He didn't take any questions at that press conference.
No.
And a lot of reporters were hoping that he would. But he probably knew then that he would have had to have gone off his script if he indeed have something, have it all scripted. Obviously, he was reading from
Yes.
notes, but if he had all the gestures scripted as well. Okay. The next image that we want to show you is of Meg Whitman, and this was taken while she was a candidate and running for office here in California. She was a candidate for governor. She didn't win, and I think what strikes me about this image the most is the way she's shaking hands with somebody who was perhaps at a campaign event here. So
This is the handshake that lost the election.
you think so?
Well, it didn't help.
It all came down to the handshake. So you have some firm advice about handshakes. I say firm because
That's part of it.
Yeah.
And especially for females. Females really are judged by the quality of their handshake. So what you want to do, touch, by the way, is the most primitive and the most powerful nonverbal signal. And in this touch-phobic society, one way that we touch is with a handshake. So you want to make sure you ace that handshake, that you get your hands web to web, palm to palm, and a firm grip. This grabbing by the fingertips
Yeah.
is so annoying.
The limp handshake.
And the limp handshake. Now, men will do that over squeeze, not to women so
But
much.
some men, when it comes to shaking your hand, they will just kind of like treat you very gently with kid gloves and just hold the top of your hand. And I don't like that. I
No.
like it when a man shakes my hand firmly. Although I have this other problem that my hands are always clammy.
Yeah.
So if you ever meet me and I don't shake your hand, that's why.
Well, just dry your hands first.
Yeah, I try to, but then it's like, oh, gross. She's drying her hands on her pants. So what is she? It's just one of those. It's my own little personal issue. But so for women and men, it's very important. It doesn't matter, what the gender is of the other person. You gotta be firm with that handshake.
You
and,
do.
and really full contact with the hands.
That's
you're
right.
saying.
And by the way, most women in my audiences say the same thing that you do. The handshake they hate the most is that limp little grab the tips of the fingers.
Yeah, it's demeaning, I think.
It is, and it feels, you're giving them a wet fish, which no one really likes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's how it feels. It feels condescending.
Yeah.
And again, the big trick to body language is to realize that it's in the eye of the beholder. It doesn't matter that I may have done a handshake like that because I'm timid or I'm this. What matters is that it feels to you a certain way.
Okay. We are speaking with Kinsey Goman, and she is a body language expert. And one question that I have for you is, what if you're just not a natural? You're a manager, but you're just not very good when it comes to exhibiting the right body language skills. Do you have tips for managers that can quickly, simply help them improve the way they carry themselves with their nonverbal cues?
I have a 2-minute tip that's been proven through research at Harvard and Columbia business schools. And that is, if you take something they call a power pose, and you probably don't want to do this in front of all of your people. You probably want to do this in the ladies' room or in your own office or the men's room. But if you stand, say, with your feet far apart, your hands on your hips, your hands out, you sit at a desk, you put your feet up, anything that sprawls, and you hold that pose for 2 minutes, the testosterone level will go up, and men and women, that means that you'll be more confident, you'll be more willing to take risks, and the cortisol level, the stress level, will go down. So you'll walk into that meeting with higher levels of confidence, and if you remember to keep part of that posture in your body, your shoulders back, your head up, you will look more confident.
Huh.
So I have a question for you, Carol.
Yeah.
A lot of what you've been talking about is how women need to not be timid and maybe sort of mirror some of the more male gestures. So are you saying that women should really, it's a man's world, they should really just try to be more masculine in their gestures? I mean, or do
No.
they have their own way of being powerful?
They absolutely have their own way of being powerful. But what I am saying is that if you only do feminine gestures, if you twirl your hair, if you pacify by playing with your necklace, everybody pacifies, we rub our hands together, rub our legs, do something. But if all of your gestures are girlish, you will be looked at by your male counterparts as what they called in some research at UC Berkeley as a likable loser.
Ha ha ha.
So it depends. You're with your girlfriend, you're out on a date, you're flirting, you're cute, then go for it, girl. But if you're in a business negotiation and you want to be perceived as credible and candid, you might want to keep some of the girlish behaviors under wraps and just be more of your own warm, confident, competent self.
Okay.
Lindsay, if we have any comments or questions from...
We do have one gesture here that somebody is wondering about.
Hope it's not rude.
It's not rude. The powerful male gesture of feet on the desk. What kind of signal does that send?
That's a good
Well, that's one of those that when you take that position, you actually increase the testosterone. But what it looks like when you walk into the office is this person is just so above you, so arrogant, so relaxed. But you know something? Men have an ability or an innate desire to spread out. And since status and authority are in height and space, they have that over us. Women will go into the meeting, we'll keep our stuff in a nice, neat pile, we'll keep our elbows into our bodies, we'll condense our bodies. Men will expand their bodies. So I always tell women, if you're at the conference table, spread out and, claim some of your space.
That's interesting. I notice that when I'm in the back of a cab with a guy, they'll spread out and they'll take all the room,
That's
legs
right.
all over the place, and leave you a little tiny space on the side. So what are some of the gestures that women make, because you wrote about this, that we should avoid because either it shows weakness or timidness?
Well, I don't think there are any gestures that are good or bad. In some situations, the same gesture is wonderful, but in others, it's not so good. Women have a tendency to tilt their heads. We do that when we're listening, and it's a great signal when you're in a collaborative setting and you want someone to speak up. It shows I'm listening, I'm engaged. But what if I went in and asked for a raise? I mean, it's just too cutesy. You want to keep your head straight. But since we have more of a tendency to tilt, we might do it inappropriately. We also smile too much. Now, again, smile is one of the most positive and powerful signals that you can give. It actually lights up a reward center in the other person's brain if it's one of those real smiles with the crow's feet that we were talking about earlier on another program.
Yes.
So if you have that and you smile a lot, that's great. But if you're a female, you're going to over smile, and you're going to smile when you're saying something negative in order to take the sting out of what you're saying. And you may smile when something's serious, and the guys in the room particularly are saying, I don't understand. Does she really mean this?
Right. Okay. That's interesting. We have been speaking with Carol Kinsey Goman. One last question before we have to go. You describe a difference between the look of business and the social gaze. And this is important for both men and women, correct? So what is the difference? Because this is an important one, I think, a nice quick tip for people who want to be more authoritative or less, let's say, sending fewer mixed signals.
Well, you can do it either way. If you keep the base of a triangle at your eyes and you put the apex at your forehead, and that's where you keep your gaze, that's a business look.
Okay.
If you flip that triangle down so it goes down to the mouth, that's much more of a social, flirtatious look. Now, the interesting thing is I've worked with groups where they say, I'm always looking at the mouth because there's so many accents in this room, I can't really understand what people are saying, and I'm trying to read their lips. But by doing that, they're sending signals that say, this is more appropriate for something if I'm flirting or if I'm being social. So just keep your gaze up.
Okay. Carol, thank you so much for joining us today. Carol Kinsey Goman is the author of The Silent Language of Leaders. Hold it up on this side. There we go. How body language can help or hurt how you lead. We really appreciate all your tips today.
Oh, my pleasure.
And Lindsay, thank you for joining us as well.
You're welcome.
Lindsay Blakely is the editor of the Business Owners section of the Beanhead site. You have been listening to The Live One. Join us tomorrow when host Priya Clemens and sales expert Jeffrey James reveal the secret to warming up your cold calls. The Live One is on every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. See you next time.